to look at what we've built in our life, it will be a perfect reflection of whatever was in our box, right? Because if it's a motorcycle in the box, it's a motorcycle outside the box.
Hey everyone, my name is Jonathan Bannister and I'm the host of Home Service Hustle, where we talk about marketing, money, and mindset. And today's guest is Weldon Long. I like to call him Wally. And guys, you do not want to miss this episode. He is going to tell the story from prison to being a prince. He's going to talk about mindset, the power of consistency, his book right here. He's a multiple New York Times #1 bestseller. You don't want to miss it. Let's go. All right, we are live. Weldon, welcome to the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Everyone, the man that doesn't need much of an introduction, Weldon Long. Let's start with, let's start with something that someone may not know about you. And I know you're a very public person. You do a ton of keynote speaking. Is there something that you could tell us that maybe you haven't said on stage or you commonly say in your speaking?
Well, yes, I can think of one just jumped to mind because I was talking about it with someone the day. And for your viewers that may or may not be aware, I spent 25 years of my life on the street. I spent 13 years in prison. And in 1996, I got hit so hard in the mouth in prison that it knocked me on my ass, and I didn't know what state I was in. So we were just talking about that. It was a kind of an interesting thing. I was playing cards with a guy that I knew that, playing cards every day. And, you deal with a lot of hot-headed people in the joint. And I said something, I'm not even sure what it was, and out of my peripheral, I saw him stand up, and I'm just looking at my cards, and I didn't realize what he was doing. I look up, and he hit me so hard right there in the mouth, it knocked me off my seat. And it's funny because my lip was split open, like it needed stitches bad. But in the penitentiary, you can't go run into the cops because then you get a snitch jacket, and it's going to be a very difficult time.
Right.
So I was just joking with someone of the day. It's not a joke, really. I walked around for 2 weeks holding my lip together until it finally started to heal together. And
wow.
I just kind of dealt with it. So I haven't talked about much about that. So you got that, Jonathan. I haven't talked about that story publicly.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. So how long were you in prison?
13 years out of from 1987 until 2003, that roughly 16-year span. I spent 13 of those years in the penitentiary system.
Okay, so this is where we're going to start talking about, while we're talking about prison, and you shared that story, let's talk about mindset, right?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about marketing, mindset, and money. We're going to cover those three topics. But mindset, you are one of the best, in my opinion, when it comes to what you do for mindset. Talk about the power.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the power of consistency is one of your New York Times bestsellers. Talk about mindset, what it means to you, what it's been for you and your whole journey, and what should someone listening today that does not have the right mindset in business, their life, their marriage, whatever, what should they do today that, not necessarily to change their mindset, but what advice could you give them to go, your whole world, your whole life, your whole future could be changed if you had a different mindset?
Well, I think the mindset is the one thing that changes everything in life and in business. And in my particular situation, as I mentioned, I was in prison 3 different times for a total of 13 years. But on that final trip to the penitentiary, which was in the beginning of 1996, a few months after I was in, my dad died. And that was kind of my moment of clarity. And after my father died, I started thinking, man, I got to find a way to change my life. I was 32 years old. I'd been in prison since I was in my early 20s. I had 7 years left to go in the federal prison system. And I made this decision, I got to change my life. Now, the problem was I really didn't know what to do. And it was just really kind of fortuitous that I stumbled into this topic about the mindset. And the first book I picked up on that journey, literally within a few hours of my father dying, in this act of desperation, I picked up a copy of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in the introduction to that book, Stephen Covey says that we have the ability to live out of our imagination rather than our past. And I didn't know what he meant. He was getting towards the mindset. At that point, I didn't know exactly what he meant. But I'm like, live out of my imagination. What exactly does that mean? And that was really good news for me, Jonathan, because, my past was violence and drugs and prison and poverty. And this person in this book, Covey, is telling me I can live out of my imagination. So I didn't know exactly what he was referring to, but I continued to read more and more books. And then I stumbled into a Friedrich Nietzsche quote, and Nietzsche said, "We attract that which we fear." And at first I thought that was kind of nonsense. Like, why would I attract things into my life that I don't want? And then I stumbled across a quote from Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Frankl said, "Fear may come true." In the Bible, Job says, "That which I have feared has come upon me." And over that summer of 1996, I started reading all these things about we attract the things that we don't want. So it's interesting because I sat down at the little metal desk in my cell and I wrote down everything that I was afraid of. What were my greatest fears? Well, my greatest fears were living and dying in prison, never being a father to my son, being broke, being homeless, being a dumbass convict. And that was a perfect description of my life. So I realized that my mindset was playing a role, that what was in here, the chaos in here was somehow getting out. And that was the beginning of my journey, of understanding, and spent the next 25 years studying the mindset, applying it in my life and business and teaching it, writing books about it. But that prosperity mindset is so critical. And when you talk about, people understanding, it is everything, right? We become what we think about all day long, to quote Ralph Waldo Emerson. And so we can talk about exactly how that works and why it works and why is it we can think about something and it shows up in our life. It's a very simple neurological, physiological process. It's not smoke and mirrors or magic or, voodoo or anything. It's just the reality of we think something, it triggers emotions, emotions trigger behaviors, behaviors trigger results, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in many cases. So that was kind of the beginning of it, and spent the last, like I said, 25 years studying it, writing about it, and teaching it.
So you mentioned the Bible in there. So I'm taking it that there is some kind of religious background. I'm not sure your religious beliefs, but I do want to ask you those moments that happened. Right after your father died, you said within hours you stumble upon this book. I don't know how many books you were reading at that time, but
not many at that time.
What's that?
Not many at that time.
Not many, right? So what do you call those moments, those coming upon that book, hearing those quotes, these things that happen? What do you think that was for you in your life?
Stephen Covey used to call it, and I agree with this, the conscious and unconscious serendipity of the universe. And I think we're all confronted at various times in our lives with opportunities and kind of that fork in the road. Am I going to go this direction? Am I going to go that direction? And obviously for many years of my life, I took the low road, the easy road, which turned out to be very difficult in the long run. But I think it's that epiphany, that moment of clarity, when we all reach that point where we're like, I've got to do something different if I want to create something different. Yeah. I always thought people, Jonathan, that were successful, that were wealthy, they were wealthy because of their education, or maybe they came from a good family, or this or that or the other. But what I've learned is that wealthy people, successful people, the reason they're that way is because they're really good with respect to the mindset of dealing with challenges and problems, right? People who are successful don't miraculously avoid problems. We all have problems: money problems, relationship problems, and health problems. Everybody faces them at some point in our lifetime. Well, successful people have money problems, relationship problems, and health problems. They're just very good at overcoming those challenges. So it's not that they avoid challenges. They have the mindset to prosper in the face of those challenges. It's what I call the prosperity mindset. And when you have the prosperity mindset, when I talk about the prosperity mindset, I'm talking about a mindset that is geared and programmed to thrive in the face of adversity and challenges. When you have that mindset, you've got the keys to the kingdom, because nothing will hold you down. Nothing will keep you from achieving your primary objective and goal in life. It's just that simple.
Now, does that fall in line with the story or the example you give, having all the motorcycle parts in the box?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when we talk about the mindset, there's a couple of metaphors I've developed over the years that kind of help me understand it and help me teach it. And the one that you're referring to, if I had a box here, and in that box is everything I need to build a beautiful motorcycle, all the parts and all the components, the frame, the engine, the tires, etc. And piece by piece, I removed the parts of that motorcycle and pulled them out of the box, and then started putting the motorcycle together. And I put it together properly. I put the wheels, where the wheels go. I put the handlebars where the handlebars go, and so on. At some point, I look in the box, and the box is empty. I have successfully removed all the components, and I assembled them properly. When I step back to admire this mechanical, thing that I've built, what are the odds that I realize that instead of building a motorcycle out of those motorcycle parts, instead I accidentally baked a cake? Well, you simply can't do that, right? I mean, physics won't allow it. You cannot bake a cake out of motorcycle parts. So my point is that box is a metaphor for our mind. And the components of our lives are in the box, just like the motorcycle parts in that box. And what happens day by day, decision by decision, neuroscientists estimate that we make 30,000 individual decisions and choices a day. It's a lot, right? But every time we make a choice, every time I make a decision about anything, about money, relationships, or health, right? Those are the three core things in life that kind of dictate everything: money, relationships, and health, right? Every time we make a choice, every time we make a decision, we kind of metaphorically reach in that box and we pull out a piece of our life. In the motorcycle metaphor, you pull out a piece of the motorcycle. When you make a decision, you reach in the box, you pull out a piece of your life. And what happens is we go through the years, go through the decades, over the course of a life, and eventually at some point the box is empty, representing that we have completed that relationship or that business, or maybe it's, we're finished with our life. And when we look back to look at what we've built in our life, it will be a perfect reflection of whatever was in our box, right? Because if it's a motorcycle in the box, it's a motorcycle outside the box. You can't accidentally bake a cake. If in my mind I have a life of love and wealth and prosperity and happiness, I can't accidentally pull out misery and poverty. On the other hand, if I have a box full of poverty and misery and scarcity, I'm not going to accidentally pull out a life of wealth and prosperity. So the question, I think, for all of us comes down to what's in the box. Like, what's in your box? What are your habitual thoughts about money, about relationships, about health? What are your basic beliefs? Because those beliefs are going to drive your decisions over the course of your life, and those decisions will create the character, the quality of your life. So it's important to understand what's in that box, right? And another important question, Jonathan, is where'd it come from, right? Where do we get the contents of our box? I mean, you come into this planet with an empty box as a child, right? You don't have any ideas or expectations about relationships or money or health. You're just a kid. And the world starts filling up the box.
I read something recently. I saw where it said that people spend more time planning their wedding than they do planning their marriage, right? Like they don't. There's been all this time and it's this whole big day, but they haven't even asked the real hard questions or really get to know the person they're going to spend the rest of their life with. And and I just think that's true. Like you said, we're filling up the box with things that have happened in our life, and you talk about some of the things that you experienced, that you saw your father do, and the way that he was with your mother, and then obviously that allows us to take those traits in, and even though it's the things that you hated about that he did, so kind of talk about that a little bit. Why do you think that is? I know there's scientific fact behind there, so walk through some of the things that you saw your dad do that you despised, but then ultimately you picked up those traits yourself.
Yeah, so the basic premise behind that idea, that concept, is that the box gets full of ideas from other people, primarily when we're young, right? And we learn through observation. People say things, people do things. But we start picking up all these ideas as we're growing up, and they go in the box. And then all of a sudden, one day you're an adult, you're 18 to 20 years old, and you start living your own life. And guess what? You start reaching in that box and pulling those same ideas back out. It's amazing when something goes in the box, it eventually comes out, even if it's something, as you mentioned, Jonathan, that you don't like. And the two examples that I often use is that, when I was a kid, my dad used to yell at me, right? I called him Old Yeller. And he wouldn't hit, but he would yell. That's all he needed to do. And it would always get my attention. And when my dad would yell, it really got my attention. And then anytime I would ask my dad, why I had to do this or why I had to do that, he would always say, of course, because I said so. I'm your father. And I really didn't like that when I was a kid. I didn't like being yelled at. I didn't like being told because I said so. And then when my son was 10 years old, I got out of prison the last time. I fathered him out on parole and went back to prison when he was 3, and I was there till he was 10. When I got out in 2003, he was 10 years old. I got custody of my son, and I made a very simple promise that I would not yell at my son, and I would not say because I told you so. I would try to explain, why we can't be out all night, or why we have to pay our bills, right? Or why we have to cut the grass, right? Not just because I told you so. Well, that worked fine until he became a teenager, and kind of all bets were off. And I remember one time when my son was about 16, 17 years old. He came home late one night after curfew, and he walked to the door. And when he did, my father's voice came out of my body. I started yelling at my son the same way my father yelled at me. I started using the exact same expressions and words, right? He walked in. I'm like, where the hell you been? You live under my roof. You live under my rules, boy. I brought you into this world. I could take you out, right? All the same stuff my dad would say to me. Now I'm yelling this at my son 11 o'clock midnight, when he comes in late after curfew. And then at one point in the conversation, the argument, I guess, my son started yelling back. He's trying to grow up and bow up a little bit. He starts yelling back. And at one point he yells at me. He says, why do I have to be home at 11 o'clock? Everybody else gets to stay out till midnight. Well, of course I said, because I said so. I'm your father. So to me, that's a perfect example of how an idea goes in the box. And when emotions are high, we reach in and to grab something, and we grab what our father put in there 30 or 40 years ago. We're not necessarily grabbing the decisions and choices that are conducive and consistent with the life we're trying to build today. We reach in and we grab what I call a limiting belief that somebody else put in our brain. And the reality is that the key to life is to make sure that what you want today in your life, that your habitual thoughts are consistent with that rather than consistent with what somebody else said 30 or 40 years ago, because you might want something different. So that's kind of the metaphor I use. It's those limiting beliefs are very, very challenging because they're embedded in there, they're hardwired in there, and in many cases we think they're true. Even though they're not true, they become our truth. And we got to be very careful to deal with those and make sure that our core beliefs are consistent with what we're trying to achieve today.
So is it, I want to understand this better. So do you feel like it's just a notepad like in our brain, and that notepad has information on it that we picked up when we were a child, and if we don't rewrite over the notes on that pad, our brain, fight or flight, or in one of those heated moments, like you said, is just going to grab something from that notepad that was on there? I mean, like, yeah. Is it because if there was something about, like, if you would have taken, like you said, you didn't like that your dad yelled, and you told yourself that you weren't going to yell at your kids, but then you weren't going to say, because I told you were going to explain stuff, but then you found yourself in that moment when he was a teenager, he pushed you. But was it because you only told yourself I wasn't going to do this, but you didn't like make a commitment and go find some books or something on how you were going to approach it? Because you wanted to explain things to him, but if you would have found some literature on how to perfectly do that and rewired your brain, would that have allowed you to overcome that? It's
interesting you say that, because before I got into prison, I took several parenting classes because I wanted to know how to be a better parent than my dad was, right? And for the most part, I did a much better job than my dad did.
Right.
My point of that is that to illustrate how deep-seated some of these behaviors and responses are, that even if you're proactively trying to combat them and do it a different way, they're so embedded in there, because you can have new thoughts and new behaviors, but those old ones are still in there. I mean, so the metaphor that I use is like your brain is like, if you can imagine a highway system, right? And that's the neural pathways in your brain, all the overpasses and underpasses and bridges and exit ramps and on-ramps. You've got this complex system of roadways in your brain called neural pathways. But in those neural pathways, you don't have cars driving down the neural pathways, you have thoughts. And so those habitual thoughts run down those same pathways, and that's why we pretty much think the same thing every single day. We think the same thing about money, relationships, business, whatever the case may be. We think the same things every single day as a general rule. Well, because those directions are so hardwired, you can build new highways of thought, but you're never going to completely destroy the old ones. They're still there. You can build new ones over the top, which is what I've done with my life, but I'm never going to forget some of those core beliefs that were dysfunctional and destructive that were underneath there. So the key is it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work, because even though I was proactively trying to be a better father, taking classes, reading the books, in that moment of high emotion, right, it comes bubbling up. And so nobody's perfect. And as you go through your life, and maybe you're trying to build a sales career, but fundamentally you've got this belief in your head that salespeople are dishonest, or sales is pushy, sales is high pressure. So you don't really get good at it, because core belief is it's not You don't want to get good at something that's high pressure or dishonest, but you're a salesman, right? You're in sales for a living. So you've got these conflicted beliefs. You got to make sure you get your core beliefs in alignment with what you're trying to do. But that doesn't mean from time to time, you're not going to be like, man, sales sucks. But you start catching yourself. And I did catch myself in that situation, by the way, through a process of cognitive dissonance, right? You start recognizing those destructive behaviors.
It's interesting, and at the same time, I think it's scary as hell, because you know that whole saying, you don't know what you don't know, and some parents can take that, right? My parents would be one of them. Like I know they've never researched this or kind of dug into the really inner thinking of how taking something from what their parents passed on to them and passing that on, it could be poison and very destructive. But once you become knowledgeable of that, you got to feel really responsible of messing up your children, right? Like, I'm sitting here listening to what you're saying, and I'm going like, I want to make sure that, I don't pass something on that obviously has been hardwired into me, right? Because I don't want to be responsible and them sitting on a shrink's couch 20 years from now, right?
Well, and I'm fairly certain we're all going to screw our kids up to some degree, right? I mean, it's just the nature, human nature. But yeah, that awareness, and Jonathan, the reason that awareness is so good is, I teach in my book, The Power of Consistency, which I can see over your head there, by the way. I appreciate that nice prominent placement.
Yes, sir.
I teach the process of building a prosperity plan and kind of programming that in your brain through a process of the quiet time ritual. But what happens once you start programming new behaviors in there, every now and then you're going to fall short and you're going to step out of those behaviors and you're going to do something maybe that you wish you hadn't done. But what happens is that as soon as you step out of that path, you feel dissonance, like right away. So if I tell myself, for example, I'm going to be an honest and a hardworking person, I'm not going to cheat or lie or steal, and then one day I find myself stealing, I'm going to feel cognitive dissonance, right? Which is the separation between what I said I would do and what I'm doing. And that dissonance helps you get back on track. But if I tell myself, well, I deserve it if I want to take it, I'm going to take it, then I go steal something, I don't have any dissonance because that behavior is perfectly consistent with my core beliefs of what I'm telling myself. So the key is to tell yourself every day kind of how you're going to live your life, what you're doing, what you're building, what you're creating, and the core activities that drive those results. And then if you find yourself falling short one day, you'll feel that dissonance, right? As an example, when I told myself for years I wouldn't yell at my son, when I yelled at him that night, right away, I was like, oh man, that's not good. Because I had told myself for so long I wasn't going to be that way, that as soon as I did, I felt the cognitive dissonance.
So is that another word for your conscious?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But you have to program that conscious, because if the conscious is saying, let's say your conscious, or in my case, I never thought about not yelling at my son. Or if I thought, sometimes that's how you have to deal with kids. If those are my core beliefs, then when I did it, there would be no dissonance because that behavior is consistent with the core belief. It's because I had established a set of core beliefs that were contrary to that behavior. When I engage in that behavior, that dissonance went off. It's like, holy crap. And it gets you right back in line. It gets you, like, to me, dissonance kind of sets the boundaries. And every now and then you're going to step out of the boundaries. You know why? Because we're freaking human nature. No one's perfect. But when you have these core beliefs that you're, telling yourself every single day, if you step out of that, you feel it like, whoa, and you get back in line. And to me, life is a constant effort of kind of getting back on track, right? Because human nature, it's the old elephant and the ant, right? The elephant's the emotion, the ant is the logic. Well, if you got an ant sitting on an elephant and the elephant's the emotion, and there's a crossroads and you got to make a decision, am I going to go with the logical decision or the emotional decision? Well, the elephant's going to win that battle every time. I mean, the ant can bite him and nibble at him, but they're not going to slow down an elephant. And the emotion is so strong in us. And, we're always drawn to, the easy thing, the fun thing, and very rarely drawn to the hard thing. We have to force ourselves to do the hard thing. But the dissonance, if you have a plan for your life, and that's what the prosperity plan is all about. If you have a plan for your life, then that's kind of that's the guidepost. You'll step off of that from time to time, but when you do, you'll feel it and you'll get right back on track.
Let me ask you, how many kids do you have?
2.
Will you talk a little bit about And what's the age gap in between them?
So my son is 29, and my daughter will be 18 next month.
So there was almost like you had a second chance to be a father because to your daughter, you weren't in prison, right? So
right.
What was that experience like as far as Weldon 2.0? Yeah, how were you the second go around?
That's a great question. So I get out of prison. My son's 10 years old. He's with me till he goes off to college, and he's 29 now. He's done with college, and he's living his life. My daughter is actually my stepdaughter. She was 8 years old when her mother and I started dating, and she's 18 next month, as I mentioned. And it is a much different experience raising a young girl versus a young boy. They're very different in personality, but I will tell you that I'm a lot better at it this go around, right? I've heard people talk about with their grandchildren. My brother recently has a new grandson. He's just like, he's like, man, I wish I'd have been like this with my kids, and it's just a different mindset when you go through raising kids or whatever. You make a mistake and you get kind of a do-over, which we don't get many of those in life, a do-over. When you do get that rare do-over, it's really a big reminder. And so I try to be more aware. With my son, he was 10 years old when I got out. My whole life was about work. I was 39 years old. I was broke, right? So I was like, I was work. Well, Skylar comes along, and I still work, but not anything like I used to. I'm just more kind of coasting at this point in my life, and it's a much different dynamic. I'm able to do things for her that I wasn't able to do for him. Right. I think more about the impact of what I do and say with her than I did with him.
All right, so we're gonna pivot, and I've got some random questions I usually throw out there from these decks of cards I have, but usually they're pretty silly and out there. But the ones I grabbed today, I think are kind of in line with you and kind of our conversation today. So it said, if you were a boss of many, would you want them to fear you or love you?
That's a great question. Was it Machiavelli? They fear you than like you. Yeah. I honestly think my leadership style, I think there's a component, a little bit of a both. I don't think people fear me at all, because I'm more at this stage of my life, I'm way more teddy bear than grizzly bear.
Right.
But sometimes you gotta be a little bit of grizzly bear. And I think that I would prefer if that question had been respect, because I think if there's a healthy respect, then they're more likely to pay attention when you're speaking. But if I had to choose, if I only had one, if you're telling me I only had one, it would be love over fear. Absolutely.
I like the answer, and I think that healthy balance is really kind of what you have to shoot for there, because I feel like I lead from love, but when I think because of the respect, when I do get frustrated, it's felt, and everyone kind of like realigns and says like, look, we've got someone that'll do anything for us, and now we've pissed him off, right? So
I've heard it described before as I'm one part hug and one part thug.
I love the sayings that you have. You didn't go to Yale, you went to jail. So okay, so now we've talked about mindset, and then at the end I do want to talk about one story that I absolutely love, and it's still about mindset. But let's talk about money. All right, so what? You came out of prison, you were broke, you were work. I think success, did it come quick? I know it didn't come easy, but how you started out, when did you get into HVAC sales?
So I was in the halfway house at 39 years old in January of 2003, and it took me 6 months to find a job. I was out knocking on doors, pounding the pavement. It was tough to get a job, 39 years old. No experience, no education. I dropped out of high school in 9th grade, 3-time convicted felon, blah, 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 prison, all that stuff. But at the end of that 6 months, I happened to knock on the door of a little heating and air conditioning company. And the guy asked me if I could sell air conditioners. And I said, I thought I could. And he gave me a shot. And that was my first introduction to the heating and air conditioning business. That would have been in June and the first of July of 2003. And,
where was that? Is that in Colorado?
In Colorado Springs, yep. For a guy who actually recently just passed away, very young, Jesse Vigil, had a company here called JD Vigil. And Drew Cameron, who is a friend of mine to this day, is a well-known consultant. He was actually working with that company to hire some salespeople. And he was the first one to interview me and actually agreed to give me the shot despite my prison record. I went out my first month, which was July of 2003. I sold $149,000 of air conditioners and made it, $13,000 whatever in commissions. I've still got those lead sheets here around here somewhere. I saw them recently moving some stuff around, and that was it for me. Right, I never looked back. Right,
and is that one of those moments? Is that like coming upon the book in prison?
Absolutely, because there was a point. It's another story that you might find interesting. So I got out in January, and it's Colorado. I don't have a car. It's cold. So I'm riding the bus and walking around, knocking on doors, trying to find a job. Like I would literally just knock on like a bakery, the veterinarian, the liquor store. Didn't matter. Like every door I'd knock on. You need any help? Need any help? Need any help? And I had a little spiel, and I would say, "How do you do? I'm Weldon Long. I need one shot, one job, one opportunity. I'll never lie, cheat, or steal. Just give me one chance." And people would say, "Wow, we need some great attitudes like that around here," And then I have to say, "Well, now there's a little more to the story." And I tell about the prison. People would say, "Thanks, but no thanks." This went on until about April. And in April, I walked in this office. The guy was looking for some salespeople, and I told him my story, and he looked at me from across his desk, and he goes, "Man, I think you're a changed man." And I'm like, "That's what I've been trying to tell folks." And he says, "Hold on a second." So he walks out of his office. And he comes back in and he goes, "Just write down when you went to prison, why you went to prison real quick. I'm going to take this down to human resources and see if we can find something." And he comes back about 10 minutes later with this, look of defeat on his face. And he says, "Man," I said, "do whatever you say. Don't let it be the word no. I need this job in ways you can't even imagine." And he says, "Well, if it was up to me, it'd be yes." He said, "But human resources said with your record, there's just no way." And then he sat down behind his desk. And he looked at me, and the words he said pierced me like an arrow. It was the pity in his voice that got to me. He looked at me from across his desk, and he says, "What are you going to do?" And I'm like, "What am I going to do? I'm going to get me a job. I'm going to get my son and build a life. Have you been paying attention?" I said, "Listen, if you got a job, I want it. I'll go wash your freaking car. I'll scrub your freaking toilets. But I don't need your sympathy. This ain't the worst day I've had in a long time, trust me." And I marched out of his office. I walked out of the building. It's about 4:30. It's in the wintertime in Colorado, so sun's going down behind Pikes Peak. And I had about a half a mile walk to the bus, and I was freezing my ass off. It was cold and windy. I get to the bus, and the bus is late. I get on the bus, and I get back to the halfway house late. And it's just this long, crazy story. I'm scared to death. And I walk in back to my room, and I sit on my bunk, and I hear this voice in my head, like, "How bad do you want it? Did you expect it to be easy?" And I'm like, "No, it's not supposed to be easy. I've been at this for 4 months." So I got up the next morning, knocking on doors. "How do you do? I'm Weldon Long, blah, 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 blah." 2 months later, I walk in that heating and air conditioning company. And so when you say, was it one of those moments? Yes, because if I didn't get a job, I didn't know what was going to happen. Right. I mean, if you can't get a job because you're a felon, and I had a serious record. I mean, I was in prison for kidnapping and robbery and all money laundering. I mean, it was like a serious, set of offenses. And so, yeah, I was really lucky. And I would tell you, Jonathan, to this day, I have an enormous gratitude for this industry, the residential HVAC industry. I mean, I've been fortunate to write books and speak in all these different industries, but everything I got, I owe to the residential heating and air conditioning industry, because that's the industry that took a flyer on a knucklehead like me and gave me a chance. And I say it every time I speak to an audience, because if the manufacturers, the distributors, and the contractors, if they didn't think I had a meaningful message that could impact them in a positive way, I wouldn't have any work. I couldn't pay someone to let me speak. And yet, for 20 years, 17 years now on the speaking side, I've been busy.
Right.
And it's because of those people and those companies that choose to give me the opportunity. So I'm extremely grateful to the industry.
So you named some of the reasons you went to prison. I didn't hear you say drug dealer. So did you have any sales experience? Like where did your sales come from? Because the whole pitch you just said, you just need one job, one opportunity, one chance or something. Like where did that come from?
So I when I was younger, I kind of thought I had this entrepreneurial spirit, but I was really more into hustling and cutting corners than I was, building an honest business. And I'll tell you, almost everything I know about sales, or at least that point when I got out, was from what I read from Tom Hopkins and Brian Tracy in books. And believe me, I changed my whole mindset. For 7 years, I pounded myself that I can do this. Something instinctively told me that I wasn't going to get out and get some high flying job, with IBM, right? Because of my record. But I thought, okay, I can find small companies, small mom and pop companies who maybe that don't have the strict hiring procedures and requirements of a major company. And that's what happened. I didn't know it'd be HVAC, but I believed I could sell because I had studied, and Tom Hopkins became a very close friend. He actually wrote the foreword to my second book. He's endorsed all of my books. And I spoke with him and traveled with him for years on the speaking circuit. But I just knew stuff from books, and I just did what he said to do. Brian Tracy too was another huge influence in selling, and I just did what they said to do.
There's power behind books, right? Power of the consistency.
And there's power of believing you can do it.
Yeah.
That was 90% of it. For the first 2 times I got out of prison, man, I ate the cheese, man. I bought into the whole idea I was a convict, thug, miscreant, loser. I bought into that. That's what society was telling me. It's what I was telling myself. You don't go to prison because you're a good member of society. You go to prison because you can't be trusted around other people. Well, I bought into that. Like, damn, I'm just and that last time I went to prison and my dad died, and I started reading this stuff about the mindset, like, I got to stop defining myself as a loser-ass convict. Mm-hmm. Because as long as I think that's what I am, I'm going to be right. I started believing I was a successful entrepreneur. There was nothing in my history that would justify me believing that, but I was an irrational optimist, man. I believe great things are going to happen.
So how long did that mind shift take you? I mean, 13 years in prison,
yeah.
In and out of trouble, a lot of self-doubt. How long did that take you once you started selling air conditioning equipment that you were like, I'm not a convicted felon? That's my past, but my future is going to be different.
I think that part that I'm not going to be a criminal, a thief, and a liar anymore came pretty quick. Okay. I would say within months. Like, I decided, I'm not playing the prison game. And by the way, I spent the next 7 years studying and learning. I got a GED, I got a bachelor's degree in law, I got a master's degree in business.
Nice.
There was a school in California that I did all through correspondence. And I sensed that getting an education was going to be important to what I was going to do in the future. And I learned a lot just through reading books and correspondence. You do courses, you send them back, and they, it's a very inefficient way to do it, I guess. But it was all that I had. I was fortunate that I had that opportunity. I would tell you that the part about I'm not going to be a criminal, I'm going to start living. Listen, I write in the Upside of Fear that character is knowing, or value is knowing what to do. Right? Character is having the strength to do it, and integrity is doing it when nobody's watching. Right? So I started adopting that belief system I got from Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits. Like, I have to build a life based on principles, right? Not techniques, not strategies, but principles, core principles. Dr. Covey used to call them lighthouse principles, right? And by lighthouse, he meant that they were solid, right? And that you cannot break yourself against the principle, or you cannot break the principles. You can only break yourself. So I didn't break any principles of honor, integrity, hard work, honesty. I shattered myself against those principles. And I realized that the key to life, in addition to the mindset, was getting in alignment with those principles, not trying to fight them, And I don't know when I ever got, I remember the first time when I realized I was a millionaire by a technical, but I had assets and cash in excess of $1 million, was in about, I want to say 2007 or 2008. And I remember being out, I had a house up in the mountains, and I was out in my hot tub. And I'm like, one of these days, I'm going to be a millionaire. And I said, wait a second. I have this much equity in my house. I have this much money investments. I have this much in assets. Like, I actually have over $1 million in net worth. It's like, damn, I'm a millionaire, right? And I wasn't like in the way I always thought a millionaire is like, you're going to have jet planes and stuff. But, we have a lot of misconceptions, because being a millionaire is, it just means you have the assets, and it doesn't mean you got cash flying around, because you're saving for your future and different things. But that was a real moment in 2008, somewhere in that area. I realized, wow, but just keep on working and just keep on fighting.
So let me ask you, while we're talking about money and we close out this section here about money, what would you say now with you? Came from nothing when you came out of prison, then the moment in the hot tub, you realize you're a millionaire. Obviously, you've continued on, being very successful. You still own an air conditioning company today. What would you tell a home service contractor right now? What should they protect in their future investments? Like, is it looking at their net profit? Is it looking at their assets? I mean, what is going to set them and their future and their family up? What is most important being an owner of a home service company?
I will tell you, in working with many of my clients through major acquisitions, we're talking, acquisitions of 100 to 150 million, big companies. One of the things I've learned from these guys, it's not just about your earnings, it's the quality of those earnings. And if you're building your company, with an exit strategy to sell at some point, it's not just enough that you're making money. It's the quality of that money. And what I mean by that, like the companies with the highest value, it's because their earnings come from a database of existing customers. One, in fact, had 20,000 maintenance agreement customers. And the quality of those earnings were so rich because they just constantly brought in new maintenance customers, and they weren't having to spend fortunes in going out and attracting new customers. And so when the private equity people come in, they look at the how reliable these earnings. Well, when it's based on a 20-year history of all these tens of thousands of maintenance customers, those are very quality, reliable earnings. If you're spending 20% of your revenue on marketing, and you have to do that to get started, by the way, then a private equity is like, well, wait a second, they're having to spend so much money that if the marketing ever runs out, so are the sales, and that hurts the quality of your earnings. So I would focus not just on, if you're building wealth and you're building these assets to convert one day, to liquidate, don't just think about the revenue. Think about where that revenue is coming from and the quality of those earnings.
It's, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the thinking over the last, say, 20 years, I think it's getting real strong right now because of private equity groups, that maintenance agreements and membership programs are high alert. Like, it's an important topic, but I feel like there was a gap in the last 15 years or so where I talked to business owners that, like, you make you lose money on it. I don't want to do maintenance programs. So, but I also feel like, 15, 20 years ago, it was really important because people felt like the relationships were much stronger. The referrals were much stronger. You didn't have digital marketing. You didn't have Google. So you had people like, if your dad or your uncle used this company, you use this company. So they felt like those relationships were maybe more important in their business. Do you feel like that it's coming back to be really important because of these private equity groups, or what?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, what was happening? The first big wave of consolidation. And the people, the smart money that were buying these companies knew how important those things were, so everybody was preaching it. And then after, we had the crash in 2008, 2009, the housing market crashed, everything crashed along with it. We spent the next few years just surviving again, right? Just hanging on by the skin of our teeth. And those of us, I had several companies back at that time, and we just hung on by the skin of our teeth. And now, guess what? We're back in this high-flying consolidation with multiples higher than ever. And so everyone's talking about it again. So yeah, I do think it kind of didn't seem quite as important. It was always important to the smart people. The companies I'm talking about are guys that continue to build that database through that 15-year period. But I agree with you. A lot of people took their eye off the ball. And yes, if you look at it strictly as a profit center and the money you're going to make or lose, it's not going to be profitable, right? But if you look at the big picture, right? If you look at the big picture of cultivating these customers, the most successful companies, they do it for a reason,
And I'll tell you, I've seen a couple of clients of mine that have 8 or 15,000 maintenance agreements, and they went a couple of years ago to the monthly recurring charges only, and they keep it in a separate bank account. And it's like when you get up to having 10,000 plus maintenance agreements, that monthly recurring money, it gets up there, right?
Yeah, I've got a buddy of mine. He just sold his company a little less than a year ago. They also had 20,000 maintenance agreements at $20 a month. That's $400,000 at the first of the month. I mean, talk about help cash flow. Come on.
All right, so let's talk about the last piece, marketing. So marketing here for me, you've got some exciting things coming up in the future. You've got a podcast that you're about to launch.
Yep.
Will you talk a little bit about that podcast, what the name of it's going to be, kind of what the topic and the center of that, what that's going to entail?
So the podcast that we should launch by February is called Dream Big with Weldon Long. And it really is just stories and interviews with people that have really overcome a lot of adversity to find their success. And the reason I call it Dream Big is because we all have this part of our subconscious brain called the reticular activating system. It's a filter, and it decides what you notice and what you don't notice in life. It's kind of like if you buy a certain car, then you start noticing that car everywhere. That's the reticular activating system, because now that brand or that type of car is relevant to your awareness, so you notice it. Well, we don't have time to get into it, but if you have an expectation, for example, that you're going to make 50 grand a year, your reticular activating system is noticing ways for you to continue to make 50 grand a year. So much so that if you lost your job tomorrow, you could probably have another one the next day making 50 grand a year. The problem is if a $200,000 idea comes by you, you'll ignore it because it doesn't seem relevant to you. I'm looking for ways to make 50 grand a year. So one of the things I teach is you got to dream big, so that your reticular activating system, your subconscious awareness, doesn't dismiss opportunities, people, things you need, resources that will get you to these other levels. You have to dream big. You'll never accidentally become a millionaire. Your results in life will never exceed your expectations. So you have to raise your expectations. You have to dream big. And that's what I want to teach people. You've got to dream big because opportunities are out there. The big question is, will you notice them? And will you act on them? Well, if you don't think they're relevant to you, if you think they're out of your league, you're never going to act on them. So you got to dream big.
And is that going to be talking about people who have gone through the setbacks and were able to bounce back? I mean, do you feel that those people, and no matter if it's financial success or whatever, success comes in many shapes and sizes, right? But do you feel that there's this turning point in most of those stories?
There usually is. There is usually that moment of clarity, right? It could be you came home and the wife was gone. Right. Maybe you lost a child. Maybe you went bankrupt. Something that there usually is some type of, one of the things I've learned, Jonathan, I call it the slingshot effect, and it's not a novel idea. A lot of people have had it, but like in a slingshot, right? The further down, the further back that rock goes, when you let it go, the further back it is, the further it goes. And what I find with most successful people, that there's always some event like that slingshot moment, when they just got tired of suffering and they let it go.
Yeah.
And they rocketed towards whatever their new future was. So yeah, really stories about overcoming adversity. I just think it's so important. I think a lot of people that do what I do, as you know, they act like I got it figured out and it's all good, it's this and it's that. And I'm like, hey, I'm the most fucked up person in the room. And if I can do it, you can do it. That's my message to people. I don't claim to have it all figured out. I'm trying to figure it out again every day, man. I'm just trying to keep the pieces together every day on the chaos in this brain. And I think that gives people hope that, wow, I don't have to be this guy that's got everything figured out.
Right.
Nobody does. And the people that say they do, they don't either. None of us do. We're just trying to figure it out day to day.
That's right. And I think that's really what separates people from, I think, success, whatever success looks like to them. Like when you can be honest with yourself and look in the mirror and go, like, I know I don't have it figured out, but I'm going to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Yeah. And from those that, like you said, they're on Facebook and Instagram, like they got all their shit together.
Yeah.
They don't have their shit together.
Yeah.
All right, so one more random question. This will be quick, and then I'm going to get you to tell one final story. All right, so I want to hear Weldon in maybe before he went to prison or in prison, and then Weldon up today. This question, because I think it's going to be a total different answer. Would you choose a shorter life and be super rich, or would you choose a longer life and somewhat poor?
Definitely a longer life and be poor.
Okay.
Because I also know it's a longer life, I'd fix it eventually. One of the things, I'm almost 60 now, and there's not very many good things about getting old, I promise you. But one of them, two of them, wisdom and kind of perspective, right? Knowledge. And I'm convinced at this point that when I'm on my deathbed, I think it's true for all of us, the only thing we're going to be thinking about are the relationships. and not just the good ones, maybe some of the ones that fail.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to be thinking about relationships. I love my Ferrari. I love the nice cars, but I promise you, I'm not going to be thinking about that car on my deathbed. I'm going to be thinking about my wife and my kids, other family members, good relationships, regrets, all those things are what's going to, so definitely a long life. And especially my father died at my age. And I remember when I was 32 and he died, I thought it was really young. Now I'm that age. It's like, holy shit, that's really young. Like, I'm not ready to go. And I lost my brother's wife. I'd known her since I was a teenager. They were married 35 years. And she passed away from cancer a few years back. And I remember one of the last conversations I had with her, she was crying. She knew she was dying. And you know how people talk about she was very graceful, don't get me wrong. But she was crying one night. She just told me, I'm not ready to go. Like, I'm not ready to go. She knew she was. Like, life as you get older becomes so precious. It's just, definitely that.
Well, the last thing I want to close out on is a story that it obviously made a big impact to me. I've told it a few times. You and I were in California on top of that really nice rooftop in Napa Valley, and I shot the Facebook Live video, and then as soon as I got home, I was telling my wife about it. The vision board, right? So, do you still use the vision board today?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Like, what kind of things are on your vision board right now?
Images of places I'd like to live, not necessarily the place, but the kind, like a beach.
Okay.
A beach. My wife and I are looking at building kind of a not a big ranch, but a small ranch, right? Vehicles, things that represent happiness in relationships, prosperity things, wealth things as well. Anything that I'm working on. My big thing the last couple of years has been the RV life. I just ordered a new RV. That's coming in March, and I have images of places my wife and I want to go and visit in the RV. And,
you know what? And that just reminds me, because after you and I spent some time in California, your wife liked I think the video you and I shot or something, and I friend requested her, and it took her a couple weeks, but just the other day she accepted it. And I was like, who is this person? Because I couldn't even remember. And then when I clicked on it, the very first post she had, she was in an RV. You were tagged in it, so I guess you were there. And y'all were in Biloxi.
Yeah, that was over Thanksgiving.
That's where I'm from.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm born and raised there. So
I didn't know that. Well, my brother, the one whose wife died a few years ago, they lived in New Orleans. And so he decided to sell his place there. He went over to Biloxi. He bought 8 or 10 condos that he rents out to the Air Force guys there. And he's just living the life down there, and so that's where we spent Thanksgiving week.
That's awesome. Did y'all eat at any local restaurants in there?
Yeah, we did a lot of cooking in my brother's house, but my other brother and I went out for lunch one day, and I couldn't tell you the name of it. It was right on the beach, just right in Biloxi. It was really, really nice, really good gumbo. We went out to a couple of bars. One night there, my other brother's wife was her birthday, so went to some. It was just great everywhere we went. We had a great time. And I'm familiar with that. I grew up in South Louisiana, so that was, from Slidell, where I grew up, we were an hour away to Biloxi, so that's kind of where.
Yeah, I forgot you were in Slidell. Yeah, I mean, I actually grew up going to Slidell. There was a dance club over there in Slidell that I grew up going to.
Probably in Old Town, but there's not much in Slidell, man. I can't think of much of a reason you'd want to go there.
I know, and we used to go to New Orleans every weekend, and I couldn't stand it because I just didn't like the atmosphere and stuff, and because I was forced to go there, but in high school that's where everybody wanted to go. Right. Even as an adult, I didn't really enjoy it. So
that's pretty crazy.
All right, so the last thing I want to say before we close this out is I was talking about the vision board. Tell the story of what happened with the G-Wagon a couple years back.
Yeah, great story. It's 2018. I love cars, as I mentioned. I was watching some videos on YouTube, and I came across a video of Floyd Mayweather, the boxer. And he was showing this new G-Wagon squared that he had just gotten. And I'd seen plenty of G-Wagons. I'd never seen a G-Wagon squared. And I learned that they made 300 of them in 2018. They're about 7.5 feet tall, 7 feet wide. They're just monster vehicles. And so I took a picture of one and put it on my dream board. And about 2 months later, I'm talking to a car broker that I know that deals with exotics. And I said, hey, if you ever see one of these, let me know. And he goes, yeah, they're really hard to come by. And I said, well, if you ever see one, let me know. 2 years goes by, and he calls me up. He says, I have one. It's a black one, just like you wanted. So I went out. He was out in San Diego. I bought the G-Wagon. I drive it back to Colorado. And about 2 weeks later, in my office here, my wife comes down with a stack of mail. And she goes, "Hey, here's the mail." She goes, "I got the title work here for the G-Wagon." I said, "Oh, great. Just put it right there." She goes, No. Because you're not going to believe this. And who do you suppose the previous owner was? He hands me the title. The previous owner was Floyd Mayweather Productions in Las Vegas, Nevada. It was the exact same G-Wagon I had seen 2 years earlier on YouTube. Wasn't one just like it. It was the exact same G-Wagon. And that really is the power of the conscious and unconscious serendipity of the unconscious brain. We could talk for days about that. Visualizing, expecting great things, magical things happen.
So obviously you are a big proponent behind the vision board.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know what I'm going to do when they outlaw the combustion engine because I like the big, loud cars.
You'll be flying. You'll be flying and flying Ferrari or something.
Maybe so. I might just be in that RV tooling around like an old man with his
There
wife
you
and
go.
his cat.
Well, Weldon, I appreciate you coming on the show. This was a great conversation, as always. I look forward to having you back in the future, and I wish you nothing but the best. I wish
Always
you the
good to
best.
see you, my friend. Always good to see you. Continued success to you, too.
Thank
Tell
you
my
very
buddy
much.
Jason I said hi, too.
I will do. He's coming on in a few minutes.
Awesome.
Thank you, Weldon. I
All right,
appreciate
brother.
it.
See you
All right.
soon.